In June 2025, American B-2 bombers broke through Iranian airspace, blasting the very nuclear sites Washington once tried to negotiate away. Within weeks, Iran's regime gunned down thousands during the bloodiest summer since the revolution. Confirmed dead, most were barely adults. As United States carriers now close in and Iran's supreme leader justifies his own massacre, the world stands one misstep away from global crisis. But how did 4 decades of rivalry boil into this, where nuclear strikes, mass killings, and a president's final gamble collide? To understand what truly pushed Iran to the brink, we have to go back to where the wound began. In 1953, the streets of Tehran churned with unrest as foreign agents moved quietly through the city. That summer, a covert operation led by CIA and British intelligence toppled Iran's elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The motive was simple: control over the country's vast oil reserves. Mossadegh was arrested, put on trial, and exiled. In his place, the West restored Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a monarch whose iron rule would last 26 years. Secret police silenced dissent. Torture chambers filled. Billions in oil profits flowed out of the country, and resentment took root. By 1979, the anger could no longer be contained. Crowds surged through Tehran, chanting for change. Ayatollah Khomeini, exiled for years, returned to lead a revolution that swept away the Shah's regime. The monarchy fell. Iran declared itself an Islamic republic, vowing to cast off Western domination for good. But the break was not clean. On November 4, 1979, hundreds of students stormed the U.S. Embassy. 52 Americans were taken hostage, held for 444 days. The crisis played out on television screens around the world, fueling mutual distrust that would last for generations. A timeline of betrayal and defiance runs through every chapter of Iran's modern history. The memory of foreign interference, the bitterness of lost sovereignty, and the trauma of revolution shaped a worldview where outside threats were never far from mind. These wounds would soon drive Iran to seek new forms of power, determined never to be vulnerable again. 8 years of trench warfare and chemical attacks along the Iran-Iraq border left entire towns in ruins and families searching for names among the dead. By the time the guns fell silent in 1988, as many as 1 million people had lost their lives, more than 500,000 of them Iranian. The war's devastation ran deeper than numbers. Iranian leaders studied every battle report and every foreign intelligence cable, convinced that survival in their region meant never being caught unprepared again. With United States support flowing to Saddam Hussein and the international community slow to respond to Iraqi gas attacks, Iran's planners drew a hard lesson. In a world where allies could vanish overnight, only self-reliance offered safety. In the years that followed, Iran quietly launched a nuclear program, cloaked in secrecy and buried deep beneath mountains. The goal was not just energy, but deterrence, a shield against another invasion. For decades, the West tried to rein in this ambition. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the Iran nuclear deal, offered sanctions relief in exchange for strict limits on uranium enrichment. Inspectors counted centrifuges at Natanz and Fordow, and Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium dropped sharply, but the deal's promise proved short-lived. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the agreement and reimposed harsh sanctions that sent Iran's economy into freefall. Iranian scientists restarted enrichment at record speed, racing past the deal's limits. By 2025, the program had regained momentum, with thousands of centrifuges spinning once again, and the world's attention shifting to the possibility of a new confrontation. The trauma of past wars and broken agreements shaped every decision, setting the stage for the next act in this high-stakes standoff. 7 B-2 Spirit bombers lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Their flight plans classified and their targets nearly halfway around the world. Each aircraft carried the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a 30,000-pound bunker buster designed to shatter reinforced concrete and tear through hundreds of feet of mountain rock. The B-2's profile is built for this kind of mission, radar evading, capable of flying more than 6,000 miles without stopping, and able to deliver its payload with pinpoint precision. The GBU-57 is not a conventional bomb. It is the largest non-nuclear weapon in the U.S. arsenal, engineered for one purpose: to reach and destroy the most deeply buried targets on Earth. At nearly 20 feet long, it drops from high altitude, using its weight and hardened casing to punch through up to 200 feet of concrete or solid rock before detonating its 5,000-pound explosive core. The fuse is smart, delaying the blast until the weapon is buried deep inside its target, maximizing shockwaves and internal collapse. Supporting the bombers, more than 100 aircraft formed a web of deception and protection, tankers for air refueling, fighter escorts, and electronic warfare planes to jam Iranian radar. In parallel, a U.S. Navy submarine stationed in the region launched more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles, each programmed to strike surface facilities and air defenses at Isfahan. Satellites from Maxar Technologies captured the scene at Fordow in the days before the operation. Dump trucks moving rock and sand to seal tunnel entrances, an unmistakable sign that Iranian engineers anticipated the attack. But the B-2 crews flew radio silent, invisible to nearly every radar on the planet. In under an hour, 14 GBU-57s and a wave of Tomahawks hit their marks. The combination of stealth, precision, and overwhelming force was intended to cripple Iran's nuclear infrastructure in a single coordinated blow. The full extent of the damage would only become clear in the hours and days that followed. Pentagon analysts worked through the night, parsing satellite images and intercepted signals to gauge the real cost of Operation Midnight Hammer. At Fordow, the mountain's surface bore fresh scars. 6 deep craters where GBU-57 bunker busters struck. The facility's main enrichment halls, buried nearly 80 meters underground, were presumed damaged, though the true extent remained hidden. United States estimates suggested a full rebuild could take Iran anywhere from 18 to 24 months, assuming no further interference. Natanz, already battered by previous Israeli strikes, faced a 12 to 18-month setback for its thousands of centrifuges. Isfahan's uranium conversion plant suffered the most visible destruction. Tomahawk missiles had flattened its conversion halls, creating a bottleneck that threatened to choke the entire nuclear supply chain. Planners in Washington and Tel Aviv agreed, 2 years at minimum before Iran could restore its pre-strike capacity. Inside Tehran, Revolutionary Guard commanders scrambled to craft a response. Within 24 hours, Iran launched a volley of ballistic missiles toward Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a key U.S. military hub. United States air defenses lit up the night sky, intercepting the majority of incoming warheads. Damage on the ground was limited, no U.S. casualties, and no significant infrastructure loss. The message, however, was clear. Iran would retaliate, even if only symbolically. Pentagon briefers noted the familiar pattern. Missiles intercepted, a regime eager to project strength, but constrained by overwhelming United States firepower. With its nuclear program in ruins and its military options exhausted, the regime's ability to strike back externally had reached its limits. The focus now shifted inward. As news of the failed retaliation spread, ordinary Iranians began to question the cost of endless confrontation. The next battle would not be fought in secret bunkers or over distant skies, but in the streets and neighborhoods of Iran itself. Besieged militiamen moved through the streets in white pickup trucks, their faces masked, rifles raised. Orders came down from the highest level. Crush the unrest by any means. In city after city, crowds scattered as gunfire echoed off apartment towers. Witnesses described plainclothes officers firing into groups of unarmed protesters, then dragging bodies away before the sun rose. The Basiij did not just target those holding signs or chanting in the squares. They swept through neighborhoods at night, breaking down doors in search of anyone accused of organizing or filming the chaos. Families watched as sons and daughters were loaded into vans, their names never recorded, their whereabouts unknown for weeks. Hospitals became battlegrounds in their own right. Paramilitary squads stormed emergency rooms, searching for wounded demonstrators. Doctors who tried to treat gunshot victims risked arrest. In Elam, security forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets inside Imam Khomeini Hospital, beating medics and seizing the injured. Similar raids struck Tehran's Sina Hospital, where staff were forced to turn over patient lists under threat of violence. Some doctors went into hiding, treating the wounded in secret apartments or makeshift clinics to avoid detection. The regime's message was clear. Even the act of healing could be punished. Detention soared into the tens of thousands. Human rights groups documented patterns of mass arrests, with minors and first responders counted among the disappeared. In the blackout that followed, news trickled out through encrypted apps and satellite phones, accounts of torture, forced confessions, and families searching morgues for loved ones. The machinery of repression operated with methodical precision, leaving a trail of broken lives in its wake. Numbers began to surface, even as the internet blackout dragged on. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, working through encrypted channels and hospital leaks, published their first tallies. Over 3,000 confirmed dead in less than 3 weeks. The real figure could be far higher. Activists and doctors scattered across Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz described morgues overwhelmed with bodies, some never identified, some buried before their families could even claim them. Among the victims were children, medics, and bystanders, people shot while running for cover or trying to help the wounded. Iran International, drawing from hospital data and government leaks, estimated as many as 12,000 killed in the span of just 48 hours at the peak of the crackdown. Even the most conservative counts placed the death toll at more than 3,000. These numbers appeared on foreign news tickers and in quiet memorials. But inside Iran, official silence prevailed until a single televised speech. On state television, the supreme leader faced the nation. His words were measured, the delivery cold. He did not deny the killings. He called the dead rioters and agents of foreign enemies. He said the actions taken were necessary to preserve the Islamic Republic. There was no apology, no hint of regret. For families watching at home, the admission landed like a blow. The regime had crossed a line, openly justifying the deaths of thousands of its own citizens, and in doing so, exposing a deep fracture in its claim to legitimacy. The world watched, and the question of accountability grew louder. 65 American aircraft now circle over the waters near Iran, their presence impossible to ignore. The Pentagon calls it a show of resolve, but for planners in Tehran, it looks like the opening move in a familiar playbook. B-52 bombers, usually stationed half a world away, have been shifted to forward bases within striking distance. The message is unmistakable. The United States holds the power to escalate at a moment's notice. Strategists close to President Trump point to a recent precedent. In Venezuela, a rapid buildup of air power and naval assets ended with Nicolas Maduro in American custody. The operation was executed in under 90 minutes, using more than 150 aircraft. The logic they argue is simple. Overwhelming force compels surrender without a prolonged fight. But not everyone in Washington buys the analogy. Iran has decades of experience absorbing pressure, a network of regional allies, and a history of turning outside threats into domestic rallying cries. Military analysts warn that what worked in Caracas may not translate to Tehran. The risk of miscalculation is far greater, and the cost of a wider conflict could ripple far beyond the Gulf. For now, the world watches as the American arsenal tightens its circle, waiting for the next move. Roughly 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil shipped anywhere in the world passes through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow channel just 21 miles wide at its tightest point. Tankers loaded with crude from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, and Iran itself navigate these waters every day, carrying more than 20% of global seaborne oil. For energy traders and analysts, Hormuz is the ultimate choke point. Any disruption here sends shockwaves through financial markets from Singapore to London. 3 scenarios keep experts up at night. The first is a full blockade. Mines or missile attacks would halt tanker traffic entirely. In that case, oil prices could double overnight, and governments would scramble to release emergency reserves. The second is a limited conflict, where sporadic missile strikes or drone swarms force insurers to pull coverage and shippers to reroute vessels. Even a short reroute around Africa adds weeks and millions of dollars in costs per shipment. The third scenario is a war of nerves. No shooting, but persistent threats. Tanker premiums rise, futures markets spike, and uncertainty alone drives up fuel prices at the pump. Energy analysts watch for clear signals, sudden drops in tanker traffic, spikes in insurance rates, or satellite images of ships idling at anchor. Each is a warning that the world's economic engine is at risk, and that a regional firefight could set off a global crisis. International law draws a sharp distinction between self-defense and preemptive military action. The United Nations Charter, signed in 1945, restricts the use of force to cases of direct attack or with explicit Security Council approval. Legal scholars and military advisors have warned that strikes on safeguarded nuclear facilities like those at Fordow and Natanz test the boundaries of the law of armed conflict. These sites were under IAEA inspection, and no public evidence showed an imminent threat to justify immediate action. The debate is not just academic. When the world's most powerful military launches an assault on another nation's critical infrastructure, the risk of unintended escalation grows. Mistaken signals, miscalculation, or civilian casualties could trigger a regional war. Senior legal advisors in both Washington and Europe have cautioned that such operations may set precedents, eroding the international norms that have tried to contain conflict since 1945. In private briefings, one senior U.S. legal official put it bluntly, "Every time we redraw the red lines, we invite others to do the same." The world is left watching for the next move, knowing that the rules meant to prevent catastrophe are now under immense strain. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz still carries 20% of the world's oil. And every military move in Iran sends global markets trembling. The fate of a regime and a region hangs in the balance, but so does the price you pay at the pump. In this standoff, no missile flies in isolation. The world feels every aftershock. What matters next isn't just strategy, it's consequence. Share your perspective below.